guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Okay, welcome back everyone to Anonymous Bites Back. It is, for me, it's August 10, 2021. We have David McBride in, Australian whistleblower, by now very well known for the Afghan files. We've had him in the show before, but it's been a while, and we're going to give some new updates, case updates, and we have to discuss about related cases, or at least I believe they're related, like the Daniel Hill case, and the war tribunal trial in Australia, right? That too.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Like we discussed a little before the show, probably it's best if we start with your with the updates in regards to your case. And to listeners, I want to ask, please share this around. For some weird reason, I'm taken off the shadow ban, so that's a good thing. But still, we depend on you guys to share it around. And thanks for all your help. I don't know, David. Just yeah, well, start with the updates in regards to your case.
Yeah, well, the first thing actually I always like to start with, in case we get cut off order, is to thank the listeners and thank your supporters. You know, you guys have really helped me get the message out there, and it's sort of below the line. It's not in the mainstream, but more and more people know, and I think this is why I wanted to speak to you. People, ironically, with Australia, sometimes the best way to get results in Australia is to go around the world and embarrass the Australian government through pressure around the world. So thanks to your program and your listeners, we are getting traction around the world. So thank you, everybody who's talked about it, sent it on. It all helps. And the good news is, before I start too much of the detail, is to say that we are making progress. And it's, I know some people, they just want to, be activists because it suits them. But I mean, I think in Anonymous, you want results. We want results. And I think that while it's been a bit of a long haul, there is a good chance that we are actually going to get some results and some justice. And so that's fantastic. Although it's not going to happen overnight, of course. And in my own case, it's been delayed again. And while that's frustrating for me, it's been many years now. It's probably a good sign, my lawyers say, because it means that the government are not entirely confident about their case, and they are taking more time. They're trying to get more witnesses to testify against me and say that I'm a bad person. The typical thing that happens to whistleblowers is that rather than want to argue the facts about what the government did was wrong, they will try to trash the reputation of the whistleblower, as they have done with Julian Assange, as they would have liked to have done with Chelsea Manning. And so, but of course, all of that's sort of irrelevant. And they will say, oh, look, David McBride was a difficult character when he was in the military. But, you know, the reality was I had a very good military record. And the only reason I got difficult was because I could see what we were doing was wrong. And I did get difficult because otherwise, if I just didn't say anything, a lot of injustices would have occurred. And for me, silence wasn't an option. And one of the great ironies of my case is that, you know, as a soldier, you're trained to fight. In fact, I was trained by my own military, and I was trained to take things on, which is what I did. Take things on. I was down to go to court in September, so a month away. That hasn't been delayed yet, but there's a pretty good chance it will be delayed because the COVID situation is hitting pretty bad again out in Australia. It's sort of the second or third wave, depending on how many times you count it. And the government has made all the documents extremely secret and classified, so it means that because we're sort of in a lockdown, I can't get to my lawyers to see the documents. The documents have to be stored securely in the lawyers. So it means, and then we've got about 3 different lawyers, and they all live in different parts of Australia, and they can't meet anymore to prepare the case. And also, the government have come back with so many people, so many of their witnesses to try to contradict my story that while the case was only down for 6 days in September, there's no way we could possibly have 20 witnesses in September in those 6 days. And so it means it'll probably go on next year. That's not official yet, but we'll see what goes on. The reason why that's not a bad thing for me is that 2 major things are going to happen, or three major things are going to happen. One, there's a defamation trial, a libel trial. I don't know what they call it in Europe, but when newspapers have published a negative story about somebody, and somebody can sue for damages. Now, there was a very famous, our most famous soldier, actually, by far, who won all the sort of medals you could possibly win in Afghanistan, and now is a sort of very successful businessman. Some major newspapers did a story to say he's actually a war criminal and a murderer. Now, that man, that former soldier, is suing the newspapers. And as many people have said, this is probably going to be the closest we get to a war crimes trial in Australia. Like Britain, they say they're going to have them, but they probably will never have them. And so if this particular soldier who won all these awards fails in his case to to prove that the newspapers were lying, it effectively will show that he was guilty of war crimes, and that will be very helpful to my case, because it wasn't just a matter of soldiers killing civilians. This guy was our most famous person. He was put up on a pedestal. He won all sorts of awards over a period of 10 years. He even got awards from the government for being the best father of the year or whatever. Now, if it turns out that all of that was fake, and that he was a bad guy and people actually made complaints about him, that will be a very good illustration that what I was saying was true, in that there was a lot of very serious problems in the Department of Defence, and that our heroes weren't heroes. Often even our villains weren't villains, but everything was sacrificed to the god of whatever the news cycle wanted for the day. And in the same way, the gains and what we were ostensibly doing in Afghanistan wasn't what we were actually doing, and that will be no surprise to the listeners today. But obviously, for the mainstream people, that should come as a big shock. It's quite hard to sell. It's a bit like the Vietnam War, long before your times. But where the US public began to see that what was really going on over there was nothing like how it was being portrayed by the government. And that's the second thing that's going to happen is, of course, the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And what is already happening and what is likely to happen is the Taliban will take over. Now, that will try to be painted as look how bad the Taliban are. It's good that we fought them because they're bad people. But the reality of it is, we were there for 20 years. We spent, no one really knows how much we spent, but it's something like $3 trillion, enough to give universal health care to everybody in America forever. And what did we achieve? We achieved kind of nothing. And yet every year we told the American public, we told the Australian public, we told the Dutch public that we were doing well and that we were making progress. And this is, no matter what, whether your big issue is the environment, or your big issue is justice, or even Julian Assange, the fact that the Taliban may take over Afghanistan in a matter of months, and that the government that we put in, the puppet government, was just that, puppet government, that will demonstrate what liars we were, and how the Western powers for 20 years said everything was going well when they knew it wasn't, and they kept on making the same mistakes. And it shows one of my central claims is that we were just using it to win political elections. We didn't care whether we were really helping the Afghan people. We didn't actually want to help the Afghan people. We just wanted to help ourselves. And if everything collapses after $3 trillion in 20 years and thousands of servicemen's lives lost and hundreds of thousands of Afghan lives lost, it will show that the war was a lie, and that we're telling people was a lie. So that should help my case as well.
Is it strange to compare it to the Iraq situation, where you pretty much see the West goes in, destabilizes the country, so to speak, and then when they leave, people who are much more evil even than the people who were in power before take over, right? In Iraq you had ISIS and everyone taking over, and now you have in Afghanistan you see the Taliban taking over. And what you're saying,
that's right. And everything's context. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's a big sell to the everyday people of the Western democracies, because it really goes against everything that they've been told to believe. And it won't surprise your listeners, but that is the fact. We created ISIS, not in some sort of CIA born identity department, but the fact that we invaded a country without legal reason, and we said, and then rather than sort of employing all the people that worked for Saddam Hussein in some level, as long as they weren't mass murderers, we made them criminals, and so they had no choice. And we said, if you ever worked for Saddam Hussein, we're going to put you in jail. And so what did they do? They started to fight us even harder. And then we tried to bomb them out of existence. And so we created ISIS ourselves from our own policies. In the same way we created Al-Qaeda, in the sense that we were meddling in Afghanistan back in the 70s. We were sponsoring hardline Afghan rebels, and with a very simplistic plan that the hardline Islamic people, tribesmen that we were sponsoring, we called them Mujahideen, but they were really just the basis of the Taliban. They were people who, with little education and a long history of violence, who didn't want progress, and we sponsored them to fight the communists, because we thought, the US idea was, the communists are really bad. We'll sponsor these tribesmen. Rambo made films about how great it is. But we created a civil war. We created chaos in Afghanistan deliberately. And then we left the power vacuum. And we also said to Osama bin Laden and people like him, when they said, hang on, we thought you were here to help Afghanistan, the CIA and the US government rather cynically just said, no, we just wanted to, we just wanted to damage the Soviets. We don't really care about Afghanistan. We just used you. And that made them very angry. They were armed. They were trained by us. And so, of course, they were like, well, we're going to come for you now. And then we tried to kill Osama bin Laden 3 other times. And so what did you think was going to happen? And we are replicating the same situation in Syria. We armed a lot of very hardline anti-Western terrorists in Syria so they could fight the Assad regime. We've got no intention of them taking over Syria if Assad ever went. And we have the same sort of situation we had in Afghanistan in the 90s, where we've created chaos in a country for our own interests. And then we've got a lot of angry people who know what they're doing with weapons. And we say to them, see you later, too bad. We don't really like you because you're hardline Islamists, and we just pretended to like you because you were useful to us. And then, of course, they're going to come to mainstream Europe and cause more terrorism. Now, you'd say, well, this is a stupid plan, or it is a stupid plan. Again, it won't be a surprise to your listeners, although it's a very hard sell for the mainstream people. But I don't believe that the intelligence community or the military industrial complex, they don't care, because war is good for business. And if people, if they get more terrorist attacks, that's great. They sell more weapons. So it's not their sons and daughters that are going to die. Yes, but you're right. Iraq, attacks, Syria, that's great. Afghanistan is all the same model, where we create chaos for our own purposes, and then if the chaos comes to bite us, we blame the people, we blame the Taliban, we blame ISIS, we blame we will blame the Syrian militants, the al-Nusra or whatever, even though we created them and we helped them and we kind of stirred up the situation in the first place. So it is pretty bad. The good thing is more and more people are beginning to see that. There's question marks over the things like the false flag gas attacks in Syria, where in order to generate public support for the war, it may have been, I say may, but it may have been that the Western powers, secret services, actually did their own gas attack to try to blame on the Syrian government. I mean, that's all very murky stuff. And what I can say from being an insider in the government is I couldn't rule any of that out. We do some very bad things in the name of um, our sort of toxic, what I would call toxic nationalism, where the US is right no matter what. So therefore, it's fine for us to, do a fake attack and blame it on the Russians or blame it on the Chinese. A lot of these so-called cyber attacks, which the Chinese are supposed to have carried out, in order to, and then of course we get more aggressive towards the Chinese. They have probably been carried out by our own security services in order to get public support to hate the Chinese and hate the Russians. We're at that state, and the people in the government totally okay with that. They justify it and they say, "Oh, look, that's fine. We know that the Chinese are really bad and the Russians are really bad. We've lost the forest for the trees, where we don't see there's anything wrong with that anymore. We don't, and this goes back to my case to say there are some lines in the sand which are wrong. We can't create problems and then go to fix those problems if there weren't any problems there in the first place. And by doing so, we've lost our moral high ground in the West. And we'd like to think that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. But if we start doing all these underhand tactics where create problems, where we secretly sponsor terrorism, and then we act surprised when it happens, we're becoming the bad guys if we're not of the world, if we're not already. And all of that just comes down to truth. And Julian Assange, that was his point, to say it wasn't so much about leaking the documents, it was about getting justice. And it comes back to his famous quote, if wars are started by lies, perhaps peace will be started by truth. And I agree with that. And to say, and I also have faith in the American public, the Australian public, the Dutch. If people are able to see what's actually going on, you don't have to be a hippie or sort of an anti-establishment person just to be appalled at the idea that our government is not fighting terrorism, but is actually creating terrorism. We're killing civilians. And we're actually creating a lot of these problems. That's why the Daniel Hale case is important. Because Daniel Hale said, while our propaganda says we do surgical strikes, and people like the idea, and I like the idea myself, something I have to put in my book, that the idea that we could send a missile into the Badlands of Saudi Arabia or Yemen, and we could kill some very dangerous person remotely, and we wouldn't kill any civilians, and they were people that were going to bring airliners down and ruin families. You'd think that that was a pretty good thing. But that was our propaganda. And Daniel Hale was able to point out that was not what was really happening. And we were launching missiles frequently at wrong targets, frequently at women and children, or just speculative. And we were saying they were surgical strikes, but they weren't surgical strikes. They were just blowing shit up in other people's countries. And in fact, they were making more terrorists because we were, as you would, it was a bit like, to use a Star Wars analogy, we were the evil empire, and the people we were fighting were the rebels, in that we were not running those programs with any real diligence and any sense of law and order. We were just killing people for killing's sake a lot of the time, and Daniel Hale exposed that. And I love the fact, this is why the really good thing about Daniel Hale's case is he went to jail with his head held up high, and he said, "What I did was right. Yes, I did steal paper, but would you prefer that I killed civilians?" And he went to jail with his head held high. And that's the sort of thing I'm trying to do as well. Don't really want to go to jail, but I do want to hold my head up high and say what I did was right, because that will hopefully get more people to come after me and more people to come after them. Because one of the few weapons that the West has got against whistleblowers is they can say, "Oh, we're going to put you in jail. How dare you tell the public the truth?" And if people are no longer scared of that, that worries them, because the sort of spineless people that I'm fighting against, they would never go to jail for what they believe in. They wouldn't even give up their lunch allowance for principle. And so it kind of shocks them, because they don't know what to do if whistleblowers say, "Yeah, I don't care, put me in jail." It makes the establishment don't know what to do about that. And that's one of the things I've got up my sleeve, is to say, I'm not afraid. I did the right thing, and the government did the wrong thing. And this is why my case is such an important test case, because unlike Daniel Hale, he probably, under the US system anyway, he didn't have a defence, in that he couldn't say, under the Espionage Act in the US, and they're trying to change it in the UK now, which is worrying, but you don't have a defence. You can't say, "Well, the government broke the law. I was trying to show that the government had broken the law," and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your motivation is. But in Australia, it does. It doesn't for every case, and this is why my case is important. There are other Australian whistleblowers. There's a guy called Bernard Collaery, who was a lawyer, and another guy called Witness K, who was a spy, and they exposed the fact that Australia used our sort of secret service, the CIA equivalent. We used them to spy on a tiny little country with no money at all, called East Timor. We used our spies to spy on this country, not because they were any kind of military threat, but because we wanted to find out information about their oil supplies, and so we could get a better deal on basically stealing their oil. And one of the spies said, "No, that's immoral and illegal. We shouldn't be using our spies for that." And he ended up in jail, 20 years, 15 years after it happened. Now, as a spy, you don't have a defence. You simply can't talk about it, even if you've killed people unnecessarily. You can't talk about it. But I'm a soldier, and you do have the government doesn't have a complete get out of jail card for soldiers, and they will have to look at what they did and what I did, and the judge will have to weigh up whether the government broke the law badly enough that justified me going to the media. And the government don't like that. They're trying to shut me down. They're trying to have a secret trial. However, I've got Australia's best lawyer working for me. He's an amazing man. He's doing it for free. And it's going to be a big case, because it's one of the first cases, I think, that I can think of. It's not happening in Assange's case either, but where the government's actions will be considered by the court, and the court will have to weigh up who was worse, me or the government. And that could be a fantastic test case, because if they decide that there are limits to what the governments can do in relation to illegal conduct, and that I was right to expose that illegal conduct despite the Official Secrets Act, that will be a huge test case where we will try to take to Britain, and we will try and take to the US to say, it's not okay for you just to break the law and kill people and then say, "Oh, well, we're the government. It's all legal because we're the government." If you break your own laws and people expose you for breaking your own laws, you can't then put that person in jail. So, yeah, exciting times. It won't be over for another year. But I imagine for your listeners, it's quite an exciting thing, because I don't know that this has ever been done before. And certainly the facts are on my side. in that it's clear there was a lot of things wrong with the war in Afghanistan. Um, it was all sort of fake and phony about what the propaganda we put out, and we began to believe our own propaganda. That everyone in Afghanistan that opposed us was bad, which they weren't. That everything we did was good and useful, which it wasn't. Um, and if we can get the message out, the only thing I need to do now is to get the public to understand. If I can do that, um, we will win because the facts definitely support me.
Yeah, and the weird thing is we need some kind of paradigm shift on that because at first it was just you exposing these war crimes and especially like focused on the Australian military, but then you get vindicated first by these Dutch veterans. We talked about that before. Earlier this year, they talked about a similar story in the Eurosgan area where you were also stationed, and then now you have Daniel Hale in the United States bring pretty much a similar story, just that it's about drones, but also crimes against civilians again. And now you're seeing that like all these different militaries involved, veterans are speaking out that they're all responsible for similar crimes. And at that point, we just have to realize that it's been happening with all these different countries involved. This entire army that went into Afghanistan and probably similar things happened in Iraq and other locations, like you said, Syria, etc., where they're responsible for similar crimes. And then when you look at the Assange case too, where he published about collateral murder and other crimes committed against civilians, that it is the people who talk about these crimes, expose them, who are being locked up and who are being punished. But the people who do it are not being punished. They walk free, and that is like the people need to realize that this is going on in front of us. And they're
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, this is the thing, and I was a military lawyer. For those that don't know, I was a soldier first, and then I was a lawyer after I left the British Army, and then I became a military lawyer in the Australian Army. And I had very good qualifications. I had 3 degrees, 3 law degrees, one from Oxford, and I knew what I was talking about. And that's the problem. We had rules. It wasn't like, you could just do what you want. There were rules, as Chelsea Manning exposed, and Daniel Hale exposed, and I exposed, and Julian Assange exposed. There were rules, but we just didn't follow the rules. And the thing about it was, the military's attitude was, oh, well, as long as nobody finds out. The paradigm shift was, it no longer mattered what really went on. It was just what story was printed in the newspapers. And so it's a big story in so many ways because it links into press censorship. It links into putting out propaganda over the truth. It links into a lot of things, but it came back to exactly what you said. We did not follow our own rules. And why that, people would say, oh, well, the rules are not so. The problem with that was that we were creating terrorists. I mean, if you were in Baghdad at the time of collateral murder and your family or someone you knew, or even if you just witnessed children being killed by the Americans, and then the Americans, that obviously happens in war, but then they covered it up and they actually said to the helicopter pilots had no case to answer for. That would make you a terrorist. If you weren't already a terrorist, that would make you a terrorist. And you'd say, wow, these guys are just liars, they're cheats, they're murderers, and there's no accountability. Now, back in Washington, they were like, oh, well, we're fighting a war against such bad people, anything goes, we can do whatever we want. But that's obviously a lie because we've become the bad people. If we just go around and kill people, we don't follow our own rules, and then when we get exposed, we try to do a cover-up and say, oh, no, everything was fine, as they did in that collateral murder case. That's the big problem with collateral murder, not the fact that they killed children, but the fact that they tried to say it was all fine. And they even put out an elaborate plan. They lied to the Reuters people, and it's a microcosm. The collateral murder one is a microcosm of the whole Iraq, Afghanistan war, everything Julian Assange was saying, in that not only did they kill children because they were incompetent, secondly, when the journalists asked about it, they put together an elaborate cover-up that said, "Oh no, you misunderstood what happened, and there were really armed and dangerous people there, which they weren't." And then they didn't even internally put the helicopter pilots on trial. So there wasn't just one bad thing; there were three bad things in a row. And four, because now they're trying to put Julian Assange in jail, or they did put Chelsea Manning in jail, and they're now trying to put Assange in jail simply for revealing the three other things: that civilians were killed, that they were covered up, and that the military didn't punish anybody. And so, yes, you're right. The idea that they can get away with putting people in jail for simply exposing exposing terrible crimes and exposing that we're liars and cheats and murderers. What is going to happen in the future if everybody who exposes the government murders ends up in jail themselves? I mean, we really are going to end up with a truly evil society. It will not be an exaggeration to say that if we put everyone who speaks against the government in jail simply because they speak against the government, we are going to end up with a very evil government.
Okay. I'm just reading through the chat to see if people are asking any questions. So someone asks, what's the definition of terrorism, right? It's an act that is intended to inflict fear on a population. Isn't that what we've been living under the last 18 months? I think it might be going on for a lot longer, because this is my personal opinion, right? Because the reasons they're using for all these wars in the Middle East is also this story that terrorists were coming from there, and they were on every street corner watching you, ready to strike you, and that's why our militaries had to invade these countries.
Yeah, that's what they sell to people. And that's right. I mean, terrorism is kind of a useless word in that it doesn't really mean anything. I mean, we are terrorists as much as they are. It's the use of violence, but we use a lot of violence ourselves. And it's hard to get this across to people. I wanted to say this in a room full of American lawyers, but I knew it wouldn't go down very well. But to say that the American War of Independence, I mean, it's easy for them to paint the Taliban as this kind of evil organization, but at the end of the day, the Taliban are a group of patriotic individuals who are fighting for their own country, and they're no different in many ways in that regard anyway from this sort of American War of Independence against Britain. And it's all, you can't say, oh well, but they don't like women, or they don't let women go to school, or whatever. That's actually irrelevant as to whether we can invade their country. And also, if we wanted to improve women's rights in America, I mean in Afghanistan, we would have we wouldn't have done what we've done, because we've actually made things a lot worse for women. And apparently, as Abby Martin has pointed out, if you haven't watched any Abby Martin's movies about Afghanistan or the Middle East, they're worth watching. She's an American documentary filmmaker who points out a lot of the faults. It's called The Empire Files, I think, the series. But she says there were more, far more women in schools in the 1970s in Afghanistan, when the communists were running it, for want of a better word. And yet we didn't like that because we didn't like the communists. And so we sent in the people we sponsored, like Osama bin Laden, they were against women in schools. Now, they were sponsored by the United States. And then we caused absolute chaos. And then the warlords came in, and they weren't for women anyway, and they were backed by the US. And so we're very we use, as it goes back to, we use a lot of bullshit to justify our wars. We don't really care about the rights of women in Afghanistan, or the US doesn't. Otherwise, they would never have done what they've done. In fact, the Taliban came to power actually supporting human rights in their own way, in that the warlords who the US were sponsoring would just rape young women as they saw fit. They would just grab women, rape them, and kill them if necessary. And there was a famous case where two 12-year-olds were taken by one of the US-backed warlords and raped and killed. And of course, the families were upset. And it was Mullah Omar, the leader of the Taliban, who said enough's enough. And he got a group of people together, and he's sort of like his followers, and they went to the warlords' compound, vastly outnumbered by the warlords, and fought this warlord, beat his followers, and they hung the warlord who'd raped the 12-year-old girls up hung him on the barrel of a tank. Now that's how the Taliban legend started, but he was actually, Mullah Omar at that point, he was outraged by the rape and murder of these two 12-year-old girls. So the idea that they just kill girls is not true. They were fighting against savagery and barbarism, which the US had made. And while they're not, they were quite barbaric themselves. It was a situation that we had made, and we don't like the public to find the whole truth. We put out a lot of propaganda about them, and one of the things you do as a military lawyer is you have to sign off on propaganda because we put out false messages. So a lot of things that the West puts out about what's going on in Afghanistan and what the Taliban did or didn't do, or what ISIS did or didn't do, often it's a false message. It doesn't mean they were good people, but we use a lot of false messages against them. And there's no what I would call adult supervision on those false messages, in the sense that there isn't some really sensible old guy looking over the false messaging and saying, yeah, look, that's a bit of a step too far. We can't do a false gas attack and blame it on Assad. That's really, there isn't anybody doing that. So you can come up with something which is really harmful, like a false gas attack, which is going to kill people and is going to create havoc, and it can be cleared. And I'm not saying anything in particular is false, but a lot of the messages, like I saw, and being in that world, you can recognize a false message when you read it in the newspapers. And one of the ones which anyone who's an insider could see was a false message came out last year, maybe the year before, when it was reported in the New York Times and in all these reputable papers to say the Russians are paying the Taliban $20,000 every time they kill an American soldier. And there was no clear authority for this, and it turned out it came from US intelligence sources, and when you looked into it more and more, it was clear that was a false message put out by US intelligence services to get people to kind of hate Russia.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of stuff we do all the time. It doesn't mean everything you hear about these situations is wrong, but I mean, this is one of the things I'm fighting against. We can't do that. If we want to be the good guys of the world, we can't put out false messages, because then how are the everyday people going to know which ones are false and which ones are not?
Well,
and
I think that the Russia story has like two two parts in it, and like one part is having people always be scared of Russia, right? But second is to feed this fear campaign of like making people believe that this local force is much stronger than they are actually, because they have like a big country like Russia behind it, and they are a serious threat because of that. And yeah,
Yeah, no, they want to build up this Russian hate. I did and it's fascinating. I did how entrenched it is. I did an interview with RT, Russia Today. Well, with George Galloway, who's a British guy who was, as you would probably know, your listeners would know, he was a member of Parliament, a member of European Parliament. He's a politician.
yeah, I spoke to him a few times too. Yeah.
Yeah. Left wing guy, very good guy. Anyway, a lot of people my friends, sort of conservative friends, were like outraged. So how can you speak to him? He's a Russian puppet or something. But we didn't speak about Russia. We didn't mention anything to do with Russia. We didn't mention. I just spoke my case, and I talked about Afghanistan and whatever. But people just and so there was no Russian propaganda there. It was just me saying what I believed about Afghanistan and war crimes and cover-ups. But yeah, people just oh my God, how dare you speak to? And they couldn't see that Russia, how hypocritical that is. That Russia, I was just speaking my truth to someone who was prepared to listen, and it had nothing to do with Russia. And that anyway, the Russians are capitalists now, and they do whatever they do, we do. Put it that way, and whatever we do, they do. And so it's but some people have this real block in their mind. Where they will just anything to do with our so-called enemy states is necessarily bad, and anything we do, however sinister and and dishonest, is good. But obviously that's not the case, and the more that goes on, the worse things are going to become. And we just have to we have to start telling the truth, and that's the only way to get peace in the Middle East, or is we need to start apologising for the bad stuff we've done in the past. We need to say yes, even if we do our best positive spin to say the war in Iraq was a mistake. We thought it was going to be good, and we thought we'd get rid of Saddam Hussein and everybody would live happy ever after. But that's not how it turned out. The war in Afghanistan was a mistake. We didn't not even so much going there, but when we got there, we did not run it honestly. We did not really try to help the Afghans, and we should have known with all our brains and money. We should have done better. Now, this has happened on a micro scale in Afghanistan, and it's worked quite well. We had a soldier who, while he didn't commit war crimes, he was a witness to one. He was a witness to a murder. He didn't directly saw it, but a soldier was. Oh no! They went into a village. SAS went into a village. They just shot a random person. And then this guy was the doctor. The witness was a doctor, and he treated the person for a gunshot wound, and it wasn't bad. And the Afghan villager, wasn't going to die from the gunshot wound. So the doctor treated him, and while he had stabilised him, and he was happy that he was going to survive, another SAS soldier, a senior SAS soldier, came and grabbed the wounded man, took him off to a room, and the doctor didn't see him again. And he said, "What happened to that guy that you took away from me?" And the SAS soldier said, "Oh, he died." And then the villagers came around and they found his body sort of trampled to death. And it seems like, because there's other witnesses as well. There's another witness, the radio operator, who said, there's no doubt about it, they took the guy off the room, they interrogated him, and they killed him. Now that doctor, felt really bad about this because he didn't talk about it at the time, not surprisingly, because obviously they all have to work together, a bit like that Dutch soldier. it chewed him up for 10 years, and then he spoke to media about it, and his concern, he wanted to go back to that Afghan village and apologize to the family and say, I could have done more. And a lot of mainstream people in Australia would say, oh, they just want money, it's, they're all after money or whatever, don't do that. And actually, that's not what happened. He couldn't go back because of COVID, but he did do a Zoom call with the family of the dead farmer. And they were very respectful. They really appreciated the fact. He said, I should have done more. Your father was killed on my watch. I didn't stop it. I feel like a failure, and I need to say that to you. And the Afghans, they took it really well. They said, thank you for being so honest, and thank you for making the effort to try to atone for what you've done. And we really respect that. Now, that had a huge, we can do that on a macro scale, to say, and as long as we can admit our own faults, we will be able to heal this area. But the more we lie, the more we double down on it and say, oh, I know everything we did was right. Oh, they're all bad people. They deserve it. They're all liars. The more we do that, the more terrorists we create. If we think we've seen the last 9/11 because we've got, better security systems, whatever, we're kidding ourselves. It's pretty easy to carry out attacks like that. And if we keep making enemies and we keep killing the wrong people and we keep on putting the wrong people in jail and doing things like rendition and putting Assange in jail and trying to kill him, we are going to have more 9/11s. There's no doubt about it, because we are making frustrated, angry people. And all we have to do to stop the 9/11s is not spend billions on security. We need to start admitting our own faults, and we need to start saying, okay, we made mistakes. We did put the wrong people in jail. We did kill the wrong people. And we were trying to do the best, because they get that. They get that life is not easy, and in the heat of battle, people make mistakes, etc. But if we don't admit our faults, we are making the matter worse.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it is like the normal soldiers speaking out about it, and that whatever, like the commanding officer or whatever, are not like accepting the blame in any way. Like, because I'm just reading through like what I wrote about the Dutch veteran Servi Holsken, and he said they went on patrols in the Chora Valley in 2007. To track down improvised roadside bombs, and then they were driving through inhabited areas, and supposedly their commander intercepted walkie-talkie traffic that they believed was from the Taliban, and then they were ordered to shoot at 2 houses with heavy machine guns to see if there was a reaction. Yeah, he said. And then they saw people who came running from out of the houses, and Holsken, that's the veteran, he was ordered to shoot them all. And he said, I'm convinced that we shot and killed civilians. There was no gunfire from the other side, and he saw no weapons. I think we went through 5 or 6 boxes of ammunition, and we fired until we saw no more movement, he said. And he called the shooting unjustifiable. And when he spoke about this, the Dutch Department of Defense was at first skeptical, saying like he's probably traumatized and making up this whole story, or remembering things that didn't happen. And then one of his comrades spoke out too, right, and confirmed the story. And then they both said, like, yeah, without a doubt, this situation would be in violation of our rules of engagement in Afghanistan. And that those rules said they could only use force in self-defense. So it is the normal soldiers, like people who have actually been in combat, etc., who speak out about this, and who are like all telling similar stories.
Yeah, and that's important. It's important to note, because one of the problems you get, and in my case, there's a lot of support for soldiers in amongst the mainstream sort of people that we have to win over. And so if you say anything bad about soldiers, often you get called a traitor, and no one wants to have war crimes. Even it's very this major case we've got on with this sort of hero guy um, being called a murderer. That's really divided the country, and a lot of people still support him, and a lot of people are very angry about the fact that um, that the newspaper said bad things about him. And so, but that's a really important point to say. These are not stories coming from sort of anti-war media people, hippie sort of journalists. These are stories coming from soldiers themselves, and this is one of the things I've tried to push. Even though the witnesses against this hero guy um, are doing it in secret, their names are not known. But the fact of the matter was, they were heroes themselves. They were SAS soldiers themselves. They're not some sort of hippies. They are people that have did all the really hard testing and were really fit and really strong and really brave. And they say this guy was a crazy murderer. And so that's important, and that's to win the mainstream people over to say this is not, and this is why my case has got an advantage to Julian's, because a lot of people don't like Julian Assange. They, for ridiculous reasons, but that's just the fact. They say, "Oh, look, he's this here." They throw all these things around. A lot of it's because of the smear campaign, but still, he's from outside the tent. But I was from inside the tent. I was a soldier. I loved being a soldier. I was proud of my job. I never wanted to give it up. I believed in the military. And so when I'm saying things were going wrong, from a soldier's point of view, and the same as that Dutch guy who I've got admiration for, and the same as the Australian people who said what was wrong. And the terrible thing is, this is why, as you said, it goes back to the generals, because the first time this happened was 2006, and some of our special forces soldiers complained about it in 2006, and yet it was the generals who didn't want any bad news stories, who basically told them, shut up, I never want to hear this mentioned again. We're going to make this guy a hero, and he's the hero, and you're just, we don't care whether you like him or not. And that was a problem, because that made the situation worse. Once you start making murderers heroes, of course you're going to get more murderers, and those murderers are going to start behaving more badly when they think that they're above suspicion. And it was the real heroes are those special forces soldiers, like that medic I talked about, like that radio operator. They're the ones that spoke out, because they were soldiers. They knew that they didn't have any problem with killing Taliban, but they did have a problem with killing civilians. And I found it appalling when we grew up in the 70s and the 80s. There was a lot of movies about Vietnam, and Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, The Deer Hunter. And the ones like Full Metal Jacket, the ones which really painted it in a crazy light, had scenes where people in the helicopter gunships, US soldiers, without any education and without any morals, were just firing their heavy machine guns at people's in paddy fields and saying things like, "Oh, if they run away, they're Viet Cong," and then and if they don't run away, they're brave Viet Cong. So they were just shooting anybody. And even there was this terrible line where they said, "How can you shoot children?" And the gunner says, "Oh well, you just don't lead as far," which means you don't allow for them to run very fast. And we were appalled by that. That was kind of comedy. It's like as if any real soldier would ever do that. We used to watch that thinking, oh my God, that is, crazy. Thank God we don't live in those days. But the terrible fact is, the more we look into Afghanistan, it was just like Vietnam. They were shooting people just for the hell of it. And then afterwards they would say, oh, yeah, no, he was Taliban. And they would plant a weapon on him in a cynical way, or say he was going to throw a grenade, or just make stuff up um, in order to justify the fact they were just killing people running away, or killing people willy-nilly. And they were just as bad as the worst people in Vietnam. We weren't any better at all. With the lessons we learned from Vietnam was how to cover it up better. We didn't get any more, legal in our actions or compassionate. And I found that very disturbing. As a professional soldier, as someone that went to the Royal Military Academy, as a lawyer, I found that absolutely sickening, that we hadn't advanced anywhere. And most people can look back at the Vietnam War. Most people see that it was a terrible thing, run very badly, and for completely immoral purposes. But they can't necessarily see that the Afghan War is the same, and we need to do something about it. I mean, one of the good things and the bad things about the whole Vietnam experience is everybody knows about something called the My Lai massacre, and where the US just went into a village and killed everybody, and they did it deliberately in order to make some sort of a statement. And there was one US, or a couple of US, but at least one US helicopter pilot who said this is wrong, and landed because he could see what was happening from the air, and he told his machine gunner, "You need to fire on the Americans to kill them, and if they keep killing the villagers." And that was and he gave evidence in a court case, and he was a real hero guy. Funnily enough, ironically enough, he was never really treated as a hero as he should have been, except by some people. And the platoon commander, or the company commander, did go to jail in the US, but not for very long, and he was let out, Lieutenant Cowley, after not being in there in jail for very long, and because there was such sympathy for it, and such endemic racism, or who knows. But that is happening again today, and there is still that tug of war between those who support whatever the military does and those like myself who say, if we really do the wrong thing, something needs to be done, and people need to stand up. And like Daniel Hale, if they put you in jail for doing it, so be it. That's my duty as an officer, and I have to face that, and hopefully it will inspire people to come after me. But even if it doesn't, my conscience will be clear because I have done what I know is right.
Of course, and that's why I'm also so happy that you're I want to say being vindicated. I already think you were already being vindicated, but I mean, I'm happy that others are also speaking out now, and I wish it would be a lot more. The Daniel Hill case is very sad because he's been punished really hard already. They threw him in jail after exposing these drone strikes. And what I personally thought was the worst thing it's sad was that he said that they assumed everyone was an enemy until proven otherwise.
Yeah.
That's what really shocked me. Everyone who was being bombed, civilians or whatever, everyone was assumed to be an enemy, a hostile soldier, until afterwards they would prove otherwise, and then they would already be dead.
Oh yeah, it's bad on a lot of different levels because they had rules that said not to do that. They were disregarding the rules, and then when anyone asked questions, they were lying about it. So that shows you, again, that's got micro elements and macro elements. Not only were the micro level, we killed innocent people, but the macro level, the fact that the government was happy with that and the government was covering it up. I saw this in Syria, again, as an insider, you can tell false things put out by our own government. And one of the things in Syria was, with this huge bombing campaign, which we know. I think we dropped more bombs in Syria than we did in Vietnam, which is saying something. But we said, oh, we only killed 8 civilians or something. Now, as a military insider, I know you couldn't even run an exercise in Europe, a pretend war, and not with that many bombs and that many people, and not, and you'd still kill 8 people because of uh, airplane crashes and car accidents and such. And so that was a lie. It was obviously a lie. And what they've done is, like in Daniel Howe, they just changed the definition of civilian.
Exactly.
And anybody that lived in a huge, and that was particularly cynical for me, particularly odious, because I knew that military lawyers, hundreds of them, in working in Washington, must have been involved in that, to say, we are going to declare anybody in this huge area, as big as Holland, as big as Holland and Belgium combined, probably, anybody in there is a terrorist, and we can kill them. Not just sort of like a part-time terrorist. Everybody in that area is a full-time member of a military organisation, man, grandfather, baby, whatever, and we can just kill them all. And that wasn't a decision of some sort of disgruntled, crazy soldier. That was a decision at high levels in Washington, and it was signed off by lots of people. And that is really scary. I mean, that if you think that the US has not completely lost their way, the fact that the senior people in Washington signed off and saying, a 12-year-old girl is going to be considered a terrorist simply because of where she lives, that's terrible. I mean, that's really a bad situation. And that was never exposed. No one was ever brought to justice. Their attitude is just to lie. We're going to try to win the war on terror by saying we're going to win, and we won't kill civilians just by saying we didn't. And then why wouldn't people want to fight us?
Yeah, and here is something you might be able to confirm too, because you've been there, and that is that often they would say that certain guys were hostile soldiers just because they were wearing weapons. But actually, it seems to be very normal in there to just have a weapon with you, right? I mean,
of course, it's not. That's not the law, and they know that. You can't kill someone just because they got a weapon, and often they didn't even have weapons. They did something. They had this euphemistic name for it, signature strikes, which basically meant you were in a certain area and you had a turban, or you were in a Hilux pickup, and all terrorists, used Hilux pickups. Or another one they did a lot of extraordinary rendition of people to Guantanamo Bay because they had a certain watch. It's like, oh yeah, that's the terrorist watch. If it wasn't so tragic, it'd be comic. And these are the people who are running the Western world. They're idiots, and that's one of the things that Daniel Hale exposed. Not just were they criminals, a lot of the time they were just orders that are going to do. And that, again, as a professional soldier with high standards, that just makes my blood boil. To say we were the whole, and it's not only were we killing the wrong people, but do you reckon we were killing the right people? If the people running the program were so stupid, obviously we weren't, and that's one of the things about the failure of the Afghan war after 20 years. We didn't just fight the wrong people. We killed the wrong people, but often we elevated the wrong people. Same as, with this Australian war crimes thing. We gave awards to murderers, and often we put good soldiers who were just doing their job in jail. It was a campaign run by idiots. And Daniel Hale said that, and they put him in jail for saying so. And they didn't take any actions against the people that he exposed. So it's pretty bad. And anyway, rather than get too depressed about it, the great news is that my case may expose some of this. Whether I go to jail or not, the main thing is those issues should have to be looked at by a judge, a good judge, not just some sort of military judge, but someone who actually knows what the law is and can see that if we lie about who's a civilian and who's not, if we lie about whether we committed war crimes or not, and we think it's okay to put out false messaging, that those things, while they don't sound very bad, they have the ability to cause the destruction of the Western world, because we will have become the bad guys. And a good judge, and I've got a good judge will get that, to say we have got certain principles, we have got certain laws, and once we start ignoring our own laws in the name of national security, we are on that slippery slope to a downward a spiral into a very dystopian world. And as I said, I know that the facts are on my side, and as you said, the more cases that come out, and this is why, like, while the delay of my case is very hard, it's good in some ways, because every week or month there's another scandal. And so people are beginning, like the Vietnam War, it took 10 years or something before the Americans finally withdrew. People are beginning to see that they have been lied to, and that the military is out of control, and so are the governments. And it's been a long haul. I noticed it was my eldest daughter's 16th birthday yesterday, and I was looking for photos to put on an Instagram post. My Instagram's David Bird McBride, if anyone wants to follow me, and Bird being my nickname.
Yeah, on Twitter use its super secretive name.
And no one's ever going to guess. But my attitude is I've got nothing to hide, and so although I have had death threats, and I've even had death threats against my children, that shows you the sort of people I'm fighting against. These war criminals who are on, effectively on trial now. Someone who either supports them or them has made, death threats against my 2 teenage daughters. I mean, fuck that, that shows you the sort of people I'm up against. And the government are trying to put me in jail. They're not trying to help me, so the government can't say it's not them. They bug my phones. They harass me. Anyway, my daughter, when I was looking for photos to put on a post for my daughter's 16th birthday, I started looking back at the photos of her life, and I realised that she was 6 years old when this started, and when I started looking for justice, and I started asking questions about the Vietnam War, Freudian slip, the Afghanistan War. She was 6, and her younger sister was 4. And so now they're 14 and 16, and so it's all their life they have lived with me fighting with the government. It's been very hard for them. I don't have a house to live in. I just live from day to day on a government pension, and we had a few tears about it together the other night, and I said I know it's hard, because she said, well, I said, you're not the only one that's going to have a birthday during lockdown, because she couldn't have a party because of the COVID lockdown. And she said, yeah, but Dad, that's true. But the other girls who are having birthdays in the COVID lockdown, they're, at least they've got their own house, and at least they've got their own bedroom. And it made me cry. And I was like, you're right. I've made a lot of sacrifices for what I believe in. And one day, we'll get a house, and we'll get your own bedroom. And can you please hang in there for one more year? But it makes me emotional when I say that, because I know I've said that to them for 10 years. I've said one more email. I just need to send one more email, do one more podcast, do one more. And it makes me cry when I say it, because they have heard that so many times. I'll come and play with you once I've done this, once I've done that. And it's a long haul. But hopefully, at least she did say, I'm really proud of you, Dad, and what you're doing. And thanks to you, actually, my friend, because they saw the article that you did the other day, and they can't necessarily understand all the complicated ins and outs, but they saw the headlines saying David McBride has helped, bring a revolution in truth or something, and they loved that. They got that they, they're not able to really read and get the whole article, but they saw the headline and they saw my photo, and they sent me messages. We're really proud of you, Dad, and so thank you. That means a lot. Because it's hard to explain to kids, all the details, but when they see things like that, it makes them feel $1 million, and then it makes me feel good. I'm going to have to go soon, my friend. I better get to my AA meeting and stop myself going crazy. And but I've enjoyed today, and I hope we've covered some topics that may be of interest.
Yeah, I hope you were able to say everything you wanted to say tonight. I mean,
yeah, we can do it again. We'll do it another time. It's probably best if I don't go on for too long, because I need to have my morning routine. But I'd rather us meet again next week, and maybe we'll get some more questions coming in, and we can think of some more things. But certainly we've covered a fair bit today, and I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and to listeners, I do want to mention that you have a fundraiser for all your legal stuff going on, right? And people can find it on search engines by searching for 50 years in jail for whistleblowing on the ADF. That's what it says as a title. 50 years in jail for whistleblowing on the ADF.
And I'd be very grateful. I mean, just if you can share it to friends or put it out there, and a few euros would be great, because we need to get the message out there, because, as I said, these issues concern everything from the environment to COVID to the idea that the governments are becoming more and more dystopian and lying to us. It obviously affects everything, and my case is going to be one of the few test cases where they're actually going to consider those issues, and I'm not scared of going to jail. This is something I did as a soldier. I see it's my responsibility to stand up and be counted. I was prepared to die in battle if necessary, so I can't complain about going to jail. My only concern is I want to get the message out there. I want people to know what's going on, and as long as people know what's going on, I'll be happy. And with donations, I can help with the message out there, or even another one.
Yeah. So I also added the GoFundMe thing in the article, and I have to thank Dr. Liliana Corridor for that. She is involved with Unity for J. She reminded me to add the fundraiser in the article, so I added that one later on the bottom.
Yes, that's great. I'll give a shout out to Dr. Lillian. She never stops agitating.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm glad you were able to mention everything. Yeah, we'll get on air again like next week or whatever. Like whenever you want, whenever there's updates, we should just do it. There's something going on with the sound now. I'm not sure what's happening, David.
I'm just coughing, I think.
Oh, okay, that's okay.
Or maybe I put my finger over the hole. I'm such a boomer. But
I felt like a boomer today too. You know that, like.
It's amazing that I even got the thing to work. Anyway, my dog has been sitting patiently, and he wants to go out now. So and that's what I really look like, not slouching. But it's great to hear you, Mark. You always cheer me up.
Thank you. The same for you, and thanks for being with me tonight.
Let's speak soon.
Yeah, we will.
All right.
Okay, good night. To everyone who's been listening, please help share it around. David's fight is not yet over, and he actually does need your help, and that's why we're doing this. He's a nice guy. He would always be welcome on air anyway, but he actually does need the help. So please check it out. You can find him on Twitter. His Twitter name is a little bit different, Murdoch Cadell, but you just search for David McBride and you'll find him there. And anyway, thanks everyone for listening.